This is the third event we're having in a series that started with about 2-3 months ago about truth. And I wanted to do these for helping developing groups, but also for people understanding some of the real fundamental importance of concepts that are really central to the work we do in our school. And so it started out with the 3-hour meeting about truth, and I called it Truth Compass. Feeling and knowing our capacity, our inner capacity to be able to know what's the right direction, what's the authentic direction to understand something, isn't something that's widely known or widely known in the way that we teach it. So starting with truth, we moved on to self-deception and lying, and now in this period of time, this meeting, we're going to talk about knowing and unknowing. And so it'll become obvious why we went this direction in a bit. But I want to start a little bit by mentioning how the word truth, the concept of truth, is something we're all so familiar with and so inured with from early childhood development that is overused in a sense, and not meaning it's unimportant and overused. It's more our sense of truth and what is truth is something we're so familiar with in our usual life, and that I think we can easily miss the deeper way of understanding and feeling and knowing the truth. And what we add to this conversation about truth is the capacity for, or waking up, the capacity for feeling it, for knowing it kinesthetically. And the idea being that when you know it kinesthetically, that kind of knowing or sensibility tends to be true, tends to be accurate. It's mostly our mind and our beliefs and our conditioning and upbringing and so on about the truth and the importance of truth and so on that takes up more space, let's say, in our consciousness than the actual sensation, the feeling of it. And you could just, even now, just reflect on how you relate to just the concept of truth. In a known way, meaning sort of a more conceptual way, and in a felt way. That's what we talked about in that first hour, was how we actually have some kind of inner compass, some kind of inner knowing, inner directionality that takes us more in the direction of what's true, what's real, what's authentic. Or we have the sense of when we're off. And as we worked this, we realized that a lot of the self-deception, it has to do with just how we think, what we've been led to believe, and there's an uncomfortable feeling about that compared with the sense of this inner compass or guidance, we could call it, where there is a sense of, okay, yes, now I feel more settled. Now I can sense that's the right direction. And that's a fundamental, super important, can't be stressed enough capacity to learn, or to, is not to learn, to wake up to. The other thing, our soul has that. Every human soul has that. It might be covered up by all kinds of stuff. And that's partly what we've worked with so far. So the importance of that is immeasurable, really. And of course, obviously, being able to sense the truth of something helps us in our everyday life too. Just knowing, in talking with someone, you can tell just by the inflection how things are going, the person's body language, whatever is being discussed, and so on. If you have this kind of inner sense of what's more authentic, that helps guide your conversation and guides what you do. So the importance of waking up to this sort of inner sense, can't be overstated. And as I was, thinking about today, I kept thinking, and this may be more partly when we teach in a school, in a spiritual school, we're teaching about the truth and so on. And so we're always talking about it. And so I just became aware of, or concerned that, people, we already think we know sort of what truth is. We're taught about the truth and it's important to tell the truth and so on and so on. And that can kind of, lead us to feeling like, oh yeah, of course I know what that is. And we can become a little bit, not lazy about it, but misattuned to it. So the use of, or the engagement of this organ of perception, I'll call it, is something we work at, something we pay attention to. We're interested in it. And that's true with anything we do, any kind of practice we do in any school. We talks about waking up and sensing and feeling and knowing kinesthetically what's happening, much more than thinking and being philosophical about things. Not to, put down philosophical thinking. Philosophical thinking can be really good if you include with it sensing. Include with it this capacity to feel what really feels right and accurate and true. So we talked about then the truth, but I'll change it to say this inner organ of perception, this inner compass or guidance mechanism, is really, the value of that is immeasurable, and we think of it as really our best friend, our best ally. Without it, what's going to happen? What can happen? And we, in our orientation to understanding reality, we have orientation to truth, and we are interested then in what is really authentic. Now, of course, we come to the questions in any school like this, the questions of what am I or who am I? It starts with a who am I, and it can lead to what am I? What am I beyond this human form and so on, those kind of questions. And those kind of questions then also require this kind of orientation. It's like, most people don't ask that question. Nobody thinks about that question. Who are you? What do you mean, who am I? I know who I am. You know who you are. You're there. It's a deeper question. And all of us here, since you're here, you already know the importance of that question. You know you have that question. And that question lights a kind of excitement and flame and interest inside us. Like, it's like, really, I can explore that. What actually am I? And then we get into all kinds of things about exploring what we think we are, who we thought we are, and how we were raised, and how we were turned this way and that way, and how we believe how the world is, based on all kinds of, immersion in the, culture at large. And then you become interested in other cultures, or other cultures think entirely really differently in terms of how you explore these various things. But as an explorer, as someone who is exploring, you have to really have this kind of excitement and interest in the truth. And to take it a little further into what we're talking about here today, most people will say that they already know what they are, or they already know who they are. So we get now into the realm of knowing, and the question of knowing. And the same with truth. Because we're immersed in the world and in upbringing and our own inner space around knowing, you just reflect for yourself on how do you think of knowing. You know, how important is it that you know one thing or another, for instance? You know, most of us will say, I know things I'm supposed to know. We're all raised to know. Don't you know that as you're growing up, right? We're supposed to know. And of course we're supposed to know. There's so much we're supposed to know. We have to know. We have to know, the butter from the beans and the foods and all the things we learn. There's all kinds of world we need to navigate and so on. Of course, all kind of knowing and recognition and discrimination of this thing from another thing and so on. And so we're not saying knowing is unimportant. The knowing is important, of course, that kind of knowing. But when it comes to other things, we somehow develop in a way that we believe we're just supposed to know. And if we don't know, it probably means something not so good about us. And I don't know how many of us, relate to this, but I think many. I used to tease with a dear friend about her inability to say those three little words, right? And I say, you can't say them, can you? You know, and those three little words, she thought I'm saying, I love you. You know, no, those three little words, I don't know. I don't know. You know, it's hard for many of us to say or to feel inside us that we don't know something. It's like it's become a pattern. One is supposed to know. And so, I'm not saying none of us can admit we don't know something. For most of us will say, yeah, I don't really understand what a quark is, or this whole thing about a black hole. Now some of us might, but all kinds of things that we don't know. But when it comes to the sense and the inner feeling of, I don't know in a personal way, or I don't know really what's really important. I know what I'm supposed to think is important. I know, but when you pin down the question of what do you know, most of us will say and feel like, I'm supposed to know. And it's not easy to just sort of relax and go, like the sense of allowing ourselves to go into a space of not knowing. It's not so easy. So I could pin it around the area of knowing who we are, who am I, that question, which I think is the sort of central spiritual question for most people for a long time. But I think it goes much further than that, just in our sense of feeling we need to know, we're supposed to know. Now, of course, if we believe we know something, but we actually don't, that leads to a dead end, right? If you believe you know, you won't be curious. If you believe you know, it stops there. if we know that we don't know something, and just let it be anything. If you have the sense of, and you say inside yourself, you could say inside yourself subvocally, you say, just try it out, you say, I know what that is. You feel that? It's like an ending. It's like you're in a closed room. If you say, I don't know what that is, then inside you can feel it's like, okay, there's space here. There's potential. There's an open field. So instead of a dead end, it's like, oh, look, all these different directions, all these different forks in the road, all these possibilities. And you feel that, though, you see? So that's what I want to get you right now to have a sense of. How, if you say, I know, that kind of stops things. And if you say, I wonder about that. What that does, just your awareness. Could be, you might feel it kinesthetically. You might feel it and look around and see it as a spaciousness. You might feel it as a potential, but mostly I'm interested in how you feel it, how you actually sense it. And the sense of that, how does that wake, it has a sense of waking up. It's like, oh, there's things to do here. There's something to be understood. There's places to go. Whereas, I know, it's not that interesting. So I know this from my own experience, I didn't go into my background in this day, but earlier when I did, most of you probably were here for that. But, I'm a long time science guy. And so knowing was really important to me. And people would point out to me from time to time that when I was in conversation with somebody, I would have the tendency to say, oh, yeah, I know. I know. And it could happen not just with things, but it happen more with just interactive personal conversation. Like they'd be describing something, how they feel about something. I go, oh, yeah, I know. And much of the time I didn't really know. And I'd get called on it, which was really good. So this sense of I won't say learning, but appreciating unknowingness isn't something I'm just talking about theoretically. Long time history with that, as I think most of us do. And I think also for many of us, the sense of knowing, again, and I'm wanting you to feel yourself as I'm talking, sensing your body, however it is you sense, the field you're in, your consciousness, your arms, your legs, whatever. And you sense what knowing can be for you. It can feel like a kind of security blanket, It's like it's comforting somehow. It makes boundaries somehow. Somehow our knowing makes the world around us coherent. And you can directly relate that to growing up developmental experience, when you're little. Of course, you have to make friends with and know the world around you. That's a car. Don't go in front of it. That's a street. Stay out of there. That's food. Yes, you need the food. Oh, there's your mommy. There's the breast. All of those things, make a coherent world in which each of us, each human soul, finds its place in some sense. So we're all sort of interested in having our place. And our place has this sense of security, a sense of maybe belonging, a sense of comfort. You know, we want to have friends we go to and feel like our, so just to be living a human life, we need to have this kind of knowing, and knowing is embedded, of course, in all what I'm talking about. I'm talking a little more specifically here about knowing, and I don't just mean knowing math and physics and whatever. It's more there about knowing, you know, who and where and what's comforting and what you like and what you don't like and so on. But that security blanket, see, still is limiting. Because there might be things that you don't know that you like or don't know that excite you somehow. Because we have a general sense of knowingness and our place and our cocoon in some sense, it has boundaries around it. Good boundaries, comfortable boundaries. We like them. And they're also important, you know. But there are other possibilities. So when it comes to knowing ourselves, for instance, if we, I mean, all of what I just described is, in a sense, one way we know ourselves. Right? We know ourselves because of the environment in which we find ourselves. You know, our configuration of work and house and friends and spouse, or, you know, our dog or whatever. All of that kind of situates us in a certain place. And we don't usually think of that as limiting, but I'm saying, no, it is limiting. It can be limiting if we don't, you know, have curiosity that takes us outside of it. And this knowing capacity is one of those that, you know, can help create that kind of cocoon, or, you know, circumscribed space, out of which, of course, we venture. You know, all healthy human beings are venturing and trying new things here and there and so on. But specifically, this question about knowing and believing we know is limiting. That's what we're saying. And if you apply it to how you know yourself, for instance, that's one specific way to see where it could definitely be applied. Because most of us will just say what we already know about ourselves. And there's a lot we know about ourselves, but there might be a lot we don't know too. But there's some kind of security in knowing it. So I wonder if you can relate to the sense of freedom that, again, you might sense and feel inside yourself, in your own consciousness, when you say, I don't know. Oh, what's that about? You hold the question like that. You say, I don't know. And I feel that directly. I hope it's a little contagious. You know, you say, I don't know. Huh, what does that mean? It has a sense of interest, a sense of potential. There's a kind of freedom to it, you know? And, you know, the saying, I don't know, can also, doesn't mean you have to go find out. It could mean that. It could mean we get curious about it. As it applies to knowing who I am, yeah, I want to apply myself to finding that out. But first, admitting and knowing, I don't really know, is an obvious important step for that. But just for anything, I'm talking here today generally and specifically. Generally about the function of knowing. Generally, I'm sort of like supposed to know. If I don't know, it means I'm stupid. Now, of course, there are a lot of us too, or there are some of us who, might be identified with, I don't know, right? Like some people feel like they don't know. The intelligence isn't working. So they feel I don't know, right? Well, for that one, I'll say the person believes that they don't know, right? You say they know that they don't know, but it's not true, of course. I'm saying that all of our various self-images and beliefs about ourselves come into question here with the question of knowing and not knowing. So my wish will be that by the end here, we get to actually grokking and sensing and feeling excited and interested in not knowing. The pleasure, we learn something, we wake up something about the pleasure of not knowing. So we'll see how we do with that. I was remembering too this morning, there's a guy named David Brooks who writes a lot of stuff. He's like a political commentator guy, but he's a really interesting guy. His interests are very wide and compelling. He writes for the Times. Many of you say, I see some heads nodding. When you find a David Brooks article, you go, oh boy, because he's always talking about something pretty interesting. And so it could be about, national matters. It could be about gun control, for instance, or it could be about how the brain works and different things. So he wrote this book called The Social Animal. And in The Social Animal, he goes into, he sort of gives you a sense of things in ways that usually we wouldn't think of. So he talks about the number of neurons in the brain case inside your head. And the way he said it was that if you were in a stadium, like a football stadium that could hold 80,000 people or something, mass like that, that if your neurons were the size of angel hair pasta, and you filled that stadium with angel haired pasta, that would be about the number of neurons inside your head. Okay, so he figures these things out. And I thought, I wonder how many of those are busy, engaged. They also know, as you all know, you do MRI studies or whatever, electric, you can see where the brain lights up or doesn't light up in with various circumstances and so on. So we know that when there's brain activity, there's firing and all kinds of stuff. So I wonder what percentage of that potential, let's say, if we call all those pieces of pasta, potentials for experience, not just potential for thinking, right? But potential for experience. And I think we all know that our experience is limited, is really limited. If you think that you're a certain person that grew up in this place and that's all there is to you, that's quite limiting. How much of the neural network is taken up by believing we know? And if you could take somebody and put them under one of those machines and, see what lights up, what goes dark, if all of a sudden somebody's going, oh, I don't know. some kind of experience of inner spaciousness, inner potential. I'm talking about our experience. You know, this is your subjective experience. This is what we're most interested in. You know, what would we see? Would we see that there's a great relaxation in the brain? That's how I experience it directly myself, personally, with that sense of, I don't have any idea. This big relaxation. There's pleasure in it. There's, and it could be pleasure. It's almost like the pleasure of not knowing, because you know that there's something else to know, but it's not necessarily like that. It's not like, this isn't just about me, some science guy who always wants to know stuff, because I don't. I actually kind of prefer the not knowing these days. But, you know, also appreciate then the capacity to explore things. So anyway, maybe we've gone on a little bit long here. I want to have plenty of time for us to talk together too. So I have an exercise for you to do, and I'm going to describe it a little bit because I know that not everybody here, I assume not everybody here was here before. So what we'll do is Greg will put you into groups of 2. And you'll do a couple of repeating questions, which you've done before if you've been here before. So bear with me. Actually, I'm going to ask this. I actually don't see anybody that I haven't seen before, I think, today. So is there anybody who hasn't done one of these repeating questions? And I won't go through it. Okay, very good. Thank you. So what you do is you get, so Greg can electronically put you, 2 of you in rooms, you know, so you're going to end up in a room with somebody else. Now, if you can't do that for one reason or another, like, you know, then you should log off this meeting and then log back onto it in, let's see, I think it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be in an hour. So after an hour, you would just log back in for the discussion. But hopefully you all stick around here and do this exercise. You should. It's important that you do it if you can. So the repeating question is about exploring. And so the 2 of you sitting and one person asks you the question. And the question, first question here is going to be, tell me something you think you know about yourself. Tell me something you think you know about yourself. So the person asks you that question, tell me something you think you know about yourself. Say, well, I'm 52 years old and I live in, you know, Chicago. The person says, thank you. And they ask you the question freshly again. Tell me something you think you know about yourself. Well, I'm a little insecure sometimes when it comes to XYZ. Thank you. Tell me something you think you know about yourself. Well, I don't know. I'm actually not so sure in this moment. Thank you. Tell me something you think you know. So basically we're plumbing, you know, when I say plumbing, I don't mean, you know, pipes plumbing. I mean plumbing like trying to see from the depths of our awareness and consciousness, what do we think? What's our experience? So we're opening up experience, right? And in this case, we're opening up the experience of knowing. What do you think you know? Okay, this is what I think I know, right? So then after 15 minutes, and the person asking does it in a fresh way, and they don't agree, they don't say things, they don't shake their head, nod their head, because this is your exploration. You're basically helping that person to find out. And then it switches, and someone, you know, asks you, it switches, and you do the same question, also for 15 minutes. So it'll be 30 minutes in which you do that question. One person answers it, the other person. So that's the first question. The second question is, again, for 15 minutes for each person, what's right about believing you know? What's right about believing you know? So the first one is your, tell me something you think you know, or things you think. What's right about believing you know? Well, I'm supposed to believe things. I'm supposed to know. It's important for me to know. If I don't know, somebody will get mad at me. Thank you. What's right about believing you know? Okay, so that kind of exploration. So we're looking at knowing. What's all this phenomenology about knowing? What's the big deal about knowing? Okay, that's the idea of the exercise. So the whole thing will take an hour, 15, 15, 15, 15, and then we'll come back. So let's see, Greg, did you have anything to add?